At 9 o'clock in the morning on August 27, 1896, the British Empire went to war with the Sultanate of Zanzibar. By 9:38 that same morning, the war was over. In less than the time it takes to watch a television episode, one side had surrendered, the palace was destroyed, and hundreds of people were dead or wounded. It remains the shortest war in recorded history, and yet the story behind it is not just a strange historical footnote. It is a story about empires, power, politics, and how a single decision can trigger events that spiral out of control faster than anyone expects. To understand how a war could last only 38 minutes, you have to understand where Zanzibar was and why it mattered so much in the late 19th century. Zanzibar is an island off the east coast of Africa, near present-day Tanzania. In the 1800s, it was not just a small island outpost. Zanzibar was a major center for trade in East Africa, including spices, ivory, and, most importantly, slaves. Because of its location along major shipping routes in the Indian Ocean, it became extremely valuable to European powers that were competing for influence and territory in Africa during the period known as the Scramble for Africa. During this time, the British Empire and Germany were both expanding their influence across East Africa. Rather than go to war directly with each other over the region, the two countries signed agreements that divided parts of East Africa into spheres of influence. In 1890, Britain and Germany signed the Heligoland-Zanzibar Treaty. Under this agreement, Germany gained control of certain territories in mainland East Africa, while Britain gained influence over Zanzibar. Zanzibar remained technically independent, but in reality, it became a British protectorate, meaning Britain controlled its foreign policy and had significant influence over its government. The Sultan of Zanzibar at the time was Khalifa bin Said, who ruled from 1888 until his death in 1890. After his death, a series of sultans ruled Zanzibar, but the British made it very clear that they wanted rulers who were friendly to British interests and who would cooperate with them, especially in ending the slave trade, which Britain had been trying to suppress across its empire. By the mid-1890s, Zanzibar was politically unstable, and much of the power behind the throne came down to whether the British supported a particular candidate for sultan. On August 25, 1896, the pro-British Sultan Hamad bin Thuwaini died suddenly. The exact cause of his death has been debated by historians, but many believe he may have been poisoned. Almost immediately after his death, his cousin Khalid bin Bargash moved quickly to seize power. Khalid declared himself the new sultan and occupied the palace with his supporters and soldiers. There was just one problem. The British did not approve of Khalid becoming sultan. The British preferred another candidate, Hamad bin Muhammad, who they believed would be more cooperative and aligned with British interests. The British consul in Zanzibar, Basil Cave, sent a message to Khalid telling him that he did not have British approval and that he needed to step down. Khalid refused. Over the next 2 days, the situation escalated rapidly. Khalid began gathering forces around the palace. He had around 2,800 men, including palace guards, servants, and civilians who had taken up arms. They had a few artillery pieces and a royal yacht, the HHS Glasgow, which had some guns mounted on it. Khalid and his supporters barricaded themselves inside the palace complex and prepared to defend it. The British, meanwhile, began preparing for a military response. The British Royal Navy had several ships in the harbour at Zanzibar, including HMS St. George, HMS Philomel, HMS Raccoon, HMS Thrush, and HMS Sparrow. These ships were far more heavily armed and far more modern than anything Khalid's forces had. The British also landed around 150 Marines and sailors on shore and positioned them to support an attack if necessary. On August 26, the British issued an ultimatum to Khalid. He was told that he must step down and leave the palace by 9 a.m. on August 27, or the British would open fire. Khalid refused to leave. He believed that the British might be bluffing, or that they would not want to cause massive destruction in the city. He was wrong. At exactly 9 a.m. on August 27, 1896, the ultimatum expired. Khalid was still in the palace. The British ships in the harbour opened fire. The bombardment was overwhelming. The British ships fired shells directly into the palace, which was largely made of wood. The palace quickly caught fire. The HHS Glasgow attempted to return fire on the British ships, but it was badly outgunned. Within a short time, the Glasgow was hit multiple times and sank in the harbour. The palace continued to be bombarded for less than 40 minutes. The building was set on fire, large sections of it collapsed, and Khalid's forces were completely overwhelmed. At approximately 9:38 a.m., the fighting stopped. Khalid had fled the palace and taken refuge in the German consulate nearby, where the British could not arrest him without causing an international incident. The casualties were extremely one-sided. It is estimated that around 500 men on Khalid's side were killed or wounded during the bombardment. On the British side, there was only one injured sailor. In less than an hour, the war was over. After the bombardment, the British quickly moved to put their preferred candidate, Hamad bin Mohammed, into power as Sultan. Zanzibar remained under heavy British influence and control for decades afterward. Khalid bin Bargash, the man whose refusal to step down had triggered the war, was eventually smuggled out of the German consulate and taken to German East Africa, where he lived in exile for many years before eventually being captured by the British during World War I. The Anglo-Zanzibar War is often remembered as a strange historical record, the shortest war in history, but the reality behind it is more serious. This was not really a war in the way most people think of wars. It was more like a demonstration of overwhelming power. The British Empire wanted to send a very clear message about who was in control, and they did it with speed and force. The entire conflict was the result of a political dispute over who should rule Zanzibar, but it was also part of a much larger story about European colonial powers controlling territories around the world. Zanzibar was strategically important, and the British were not willing to risk losing influence there. When Khalid refused to step down, the British responded immediately and decisively. There is something almost surreal about the timeline of events. An ultimatum was issued with a specific deadline. The deadline passed. The bombardment began. Less than an hour later, it was over. Hundreds of people were dead or injured, a palace was destroyed, and the government had been replaced. It all happened in the span of a single morning. The story also shows how dangerous it can be when one side dramatically underestimates the other. Khalid likely believed that the British would negotiate, delay, or avoid destroying the palace. Instead, the British followed through on their ultimatum exactly when they said they would. The result was devastating and immediate. Today, the Anglo-Zanzibar War is mostly remembered as a historical curiosity, a trivia fact about the shortest war in history. But behind that trivia fact is a story about empire, politics, and the reality of global power at the end of the 19th century. It is a reminder that sometimes events that sound small or strange on the surface are actually part of much larger and more serious historical forces. In the end, the war that lasted 38 minutes was not really about those 38 minutes at all. It was about decades of imperial competition, political control, and the balance of power in East Africa. The war itself was just the final, brief moment when all of those pressures finally exploded into open conflict. And as quickly as it began, it was over, leaving behind a destroyed palace, a new ruler, and a place in history as the shortest war the world has ever seen.